I'm what Ethan Klein would consider a fallen fan, which he first coined as a label for his conservative former fans that left when he started cultivating a more progressive fan base. Yet, as the years went on, he started designating all of his detractors with this label, no matter their political beliefs. I first started consuming Ethan's content around 2017, right when he started his podcast. I was just learning English at the time. He was one of the main cultural commentary reaction style podcasts. So the reason I started watching was to familiarize myself with the language and just casual conversational speech, though I stopped listening to his podcast around 2021. As pointed out by many others, since the events of October 7th, his podcast has now fully devolved into a defense of the unquestionably genocidal actions of Israel, from the liberal Zionist perspective, of course. He also recently released a video takedown of Hassan Pikar, who is one of the largest voices on social media advocating for the humanity of Palestinian people. There are those way more dedicated than me, like Bana Panada, that are analyzing Klein's video point by point and debunking the falsehoods that exist within it, so I highly recommend watching his videos. What I am more interested in, though, for the purposes of this video, is how he got primed to start his years long defense of the Israeli state on his podcast and his attacks on Hassan Pikar after the events of October 7th. A specific part of his history that, in my opinion, goes often overlooked, which is his birthright trip to Israel in 2007. This video, posted on the H3H3 Productions channel in May 2017, on the surface seems to be a wholesome story, where a mentally unwell Ethan, despite his depression and severe social anxiety, decides to take his birthright trip to Israel, which you most likely know is a program Israel offers to ethnic Jews outside of Israel to have a carefully curated tour of their supposed homeland, fully financed, of course, which led to meeting Ela. Right after setting up the premise of the video, we can already see Ethan spouting Zionist propaganda, where he calls Ramallah a terrorist city.
What about so Ramallah? If you guys don't know, is like one of the most dangerous cities in Jerusalem. It's just like a ton of terrorists there.
Yeah.
You take the wrong street down Ramallah, boy,
You
it'd be
don't.
your last wrong turn.
You don't take the wrong street.
It's that bad.
For context, Ramallah is a Palestinian city that Ela was stationed at after finding her desk job at the IDF too boring. Ela then states that, while stationed at Ramallah, she was given the opportunity to join the birthright trip. The reason why she was made to join the trip is pretty obfuscated, as she only states that the army was cool with it.
You can take this trip and it's just a free vacation for a whole week, and like the army is cool with it. Like they're sending you there.
That's crazy.
So I was like, what?
Best deal ever
I'll
for
do it.
everybody.
Ela then goes on to lament her life in the IDF for a while, and explains that the trip was offered for free to the IDF soldiers, and considering her current conditions, it was a no-brainer to join the trip. Yet, Ethan pretty easily identifies why Ela was offered this opportunity.
Thinking they handpick these beautiful Israeli soldiers. They bring over all these young American kids,
They don't
and they're
pick
like,
beautiful people.
they're like, okay, guys, you know what to do, right?
The rest of the story doesn't really matter, as it just details Ethan and Ela's first encounter, and afterwards eventually leads to Ethan moving to Israel for a time. It is interesting to me how Ethan, despite being able to identify why Ela and other Israeli soldiers were on the trip with his group, and the fact that sexual relationships were encouraged by the state of Israel during that trip, he still characterizes the experience as just a free vacation and unrelated to Zionism. Ethan himself is a perfect example of why the state of Israel offers this free vacation. to indoctrinate as unassuming Western Jews into Zionist ideology, and to stimulate the migration of Jews from a country like the United States to Israel. And it's not like any of this is some secret clandestine operation to brainwash Westerners. The reason why I claim birthright exists are confirmed by the open admissions of those who support and organize this trip. The Birthright Israel Foundation, an organization dedicated to securing a Jewish future in Israel, platformed the article Birthright Israel Worked a couple weeks after October 7th. Alina Disik, a freelance journalist who writes random tabloid-esque articles on many Western media sources, who also works on the side as a Zionist propagandist apparently, states regarding the attack, "I suddenly realized what Birthright Israel's founders knew all along. When a tragedy of this scale happens, in-person connection to Israel is critical to preserving the country's existence. Without this trip, I, like many other non-religious Jews, would have been left on the sidelines right now, feeling unconnected from the events happening far away. I can say that for me, and I imagine for many young Jewish adults, Birthright Israel worked. I feel connected. What's happening in Israel and Gaza affects me in a way that wouldn't be possible if I hadn't spent time on the bus." This article, from my point of view, is the epitome of liberal Zionism. This idea that Jewish people living around the world, primarily the Western world, most of whom have no connection to Israel, should for some reason feel solidarity with the genocidal regime in a conflict that has no material impact on them at all, to close their minds off to any intellectual understanding of Western imperialism and the right of self-determination for those oppressed under imperialism, and to base their entire perspective on a 10-day trip of Israeli propaganda. Disick goes on to recognize the propagandistic nature of this trip, as much as their Zionist perspective would allow her to, of course, yet still ends with the sentiment that support for Israel's genocide is crucial. Many liberal Zionists, Ethan and Ela Klein included, believe that their thin, shallow critique of different facets of Israeli politics make their total support for the genocide of Palestinians a more rational, acceptable position, which, in my opinion, makes them way more insidious than the hardline Zionists, as they are more likely to recruit ignorant, but otherwise well-meaning people into their ideology. If you want to read the article for yourself, the link is in the description. While Ethan's encounter with IDF soldiers turned out to be a positive experience, others unfortunately can't say the same. Who would have thought that forcing sexual encounters between unassuming college students and the perpetrators of a genocide can lead to violence and a lack of accountability following that violence? I highly recommend you read this article by Jewish Currents that I also linked under this video. It is honestly a really well put together piece of journalism that reports on first-hand accounts of misconduct by the organizers of Birthright and the IDF, and the massive sexual coercion that underlines the entire Birthright trip as a whole. One piece of the article that I want to highlight here is a sentiment expressed by those interviewed by Jewish Currents, which describes Birthright as a pervasive environment of sexual pressure that encourages Jews to meet, marry, and someday procreate with other Jews while being awed by the beauty and culture of Israel. To underline this further, this is Netanyahu speaking to those on their birthright trip in December of 2017, the same year that Ethan posted this video recounting his very own trip.
"I want you to come and live in Israel." Now, that might seem like a big ask, but I don't think it is, because I've checked this statistically. You know, statistically, 187% of you will meet your future husband and wife on this visit, maybe here tonight.
For many Israeli soldiers, their state-sanctioned encounter with those on the birthright trip is seen as an opportunity for them to make sexual advances, welcomed or not, and all under the pretext of Jewish survivalism in Israel. and the culture that surrounds birthright excuses and even encourages this behavior. So, Ethan, no, your encounter with Ela wasn't some one in a million fated encounter, or whatever you want to consider it. It was carefully manicured by the Israeli government in their goal of permanently indoctrinating you into their cause of Zionism and Israeli supremacy over the land of Palestine. They seem to have succeeded. If I didn't know Ethan before the events of October 7th, I would accuse him of hiding behind a thin veil of progressivism and social democratic beliefs, and amping up his Zionism at the opportune moment, at the point in which he could convince a lot of his audience of his genocidal ideology. But equipped with the knowledge of his extraordinary stupidity in the past, I can confidently say that the issue of Palestine wasn't even an issue in the front of his mind until the events of October 7th, allowing his rather progressive community, before he fully devolved into a Zionist podcast, to take the lead on the subject. I'm in no way trying to excuse Ethan or trying to imply that he's a poor little man that got indoctrinated into Zionism with no fault of his own. He's a fully grown adult man who should be held responsible for the propaganda he churns out and should receive zero empathy from anyone who cares for the lives of Palestinians. Rather, this video aims to highlight how Birthright, a Zionist tool to proliferate Israeli settlements and recruit more people into Zionism, played a significant role in Ethan's stance on Palestine, and that he didn't reach his stance on Palestine through organic means. There's a sufficient amount of people dunking on Ethan, which I thoroughly enjoy, as I think it's long overdue. But I felt that this aspect of his history with Israel and Zionism was kinda unrepresented, considering how significant it was to his personal ideology. I mean, it was significant enough for him to live in Israel for multiple years after it. It also somewhat proves that he was doomed to turn out to be a Zionist in the end, and it's unfortunate that anyone took him seriously in this topic, even before his crash out about Hassan. I have no idea how this video will be received, but if anyone watches this, thank you. And I'm sorry for the amateur nature of this video, both in its scripting and presentation. It's the only video that I've ever made my entire life, so I can appreciate any feedback that you might throw at me.